The Galactic Academy was not designed for humans. Sarah Blake knew this the moment she stepped into the colossal, shimmering hall. The walls pulsed faintly with a color that defied description, shifting between hues that human eyes could barely process. Around her, towering alien figures whispered in languages that sounded like wind chimes, static, or deep rumbling earthquakes. For a 17-year-old girl from Earth, it was both awe-inspiring and deeply intimidating. Still, Sarah straightened her back, clutching her satchel as if it were an anchor. She was Earth's first student at the Academy, the youngest member of her planet's delegation, and the first human to stand where the brightest minds of countless civilizations had learned. Failure wasn't an option. "Quiet down," a voice like rolling thunder commanded, instantly silencing the room. At the center of the hall stood Cloroth, the alien teacher. He was a being of pure intellect, his form composed of luminous tendrils that shifted and reassembled constantly, as though his body was an equation rewriting itself. Cloroth's reputation was legendary. His riddles, problems, and challenges had stumped species with intellects far beyond humanity's for millennia. Today, Cloroth announced, his many eyes sweeping the room, you will confront a question that has transcended the boundaries of thought. A question that has baffled minds far greater than your own. You will attempt to solve the riddle of the boundless. Failure is expected. In fact, it is inevitable. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Dozens of alien students, some with crystalline skulls that refracted light, others with elongated limbs tipped with glittering claws, exchanged glances. The arrogance in the room was palpable, the confidence of species who had conquered stars and rewritten the laws of physics. Sarah, standing alone at the back, clenched her fists. The riddle is as follows, Cloroth continued, his voice filling every corner of the room. It is boundless yet confined, shapeless yet structured. What am I? For a moment, there was silence. Then the room erupted into chaotic discussion. It's a paradox, declared a hulking reptilian student whose scales shimmered with gold. It must be dismissed as illogical. Fool, hissed a lithe, multi-limbed alien. It is clearly a quantum construct, existing in a state of superposition. Sarah watched as theories were thrown around, each more convoluted than the last. The alien students seemed to compete to showcase their intellectual prowess, layering their answers with jargon and complex explanations. But something about the riddle tugged at Sarah's mind. It wasn't just a question of intellect, it felt like something more, something intuitive. She replayed the words in her head, boundless yet confined, shapeless yet structured. As the hours dragged on, Cloroth dismissed one answer after another with a wave of his tendrils. His patience was infinite, but his disappointment was clear. You're awfully quiet, human, sneered a student with a crystalline head. Can't comprehend the question? Sarah ignored the jibe, her mind focused. She thought about Earth, about its contradictions, its imperfections, its creativity. Her father's words echoed in her memory, sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, Sarah. Don't overcomplicate things. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. Her hand shot up. The room fell silent. Every alien eye turned toward her, some curious, others outright disdainful. Cloroth's gaze fixed on her, the light in his tendrils dimming slightly in what might have been surprise. You have something to say, human Sarah? Cloroth asked, his voice unreadable. Yes, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. I think I know the answer. The room erupted again, a cacophony of disbelief and laughter. Impossible. She's bluffing. A human? Solve this? Cloroth raised a tendril, and silence fell once more. Proceed. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing but her resolve firm. She looked up at Cloroth and spoke. The answer is a paradox. It's both infinite and finite, chaotic and ordered. It's the nature of thought itself. The room froze. Cloroth's tendrils stopped moving, his glowing form dimming as though he were processing her words. Then, for the first time in millennia, the alien teacher smiled. The silence in the universal classroom was heavy, as though Cloroth's riddle had stolen the very air from the room. Around Sarah, her alien classmates stirred in frustration, their bioluminescent eyes and multi-hued appendages twitching in irritation. Some muttered to themselves in languages she could barely comprehend. Others stared at the glowing question, still suspended mid-air in alien script, as if willing it to make sense. It is boundless yet confined, shapeless yet structured. What am I? Sarah blinked at the words. The riddle wasn't just a puzzle, it was a philosophical trap. Something about its phrasing tugged at her mind, sparking a deep curiosity. She was used to thinking differently, but here, in this classroom of interstellar prodigies, she felt like an outsider drowning in a sea of intellect. Primitive species struggle with abstraction, a sneering voice echoed from across the room. It belonged to Jalak, a towering, insectoid figure with chitinous plates that shimmered like black opals. Humans won't even attempt an answer. Sarah didn't react, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped her desk. She had learned quickly that Earth was viewed as the galactic underdog, dismissed as a species of creative dreamers with little practical intellect. She had no intention of proving them right. Cloroth remained silent, his tall, robed form still as a statue at the head of the class. His four shimmering eyes swept over the students as they scribbled and theorized in desperate attempts to unravel the mystery. Sarah caught his gaze for a moment, and a flicker of intrigue passed across his alien features. Jalak leaned back smugly. The Karkath devised this riddle centuries ago. Entire think tanks of our greatest minds have failed to solve it. It's a test to separate brilliance from mediocrity. And you haven't solved it either, Sarah said quietly, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through Jalak's bravado. The insectoid bristled, his mandibles clicking in irritation. Careful, human. Insolence isn't intelligence. Ignoring him, Sarah leaned forward, her mind working furiously. The other species seemed to be attacking the riddle logically, breaking it down into equations or models. She could see intricate holographic diagrams forming above their desks, mathematical webs and molecular structures. They were overcomplicating it. They were thinking like scholars, rigid, precise, and trapped in the confines of their own brilliance. But the riddle wasn't about brilliance. It was about perspective. Sarah thought back to her childhood on Earth. She remembered endless nights staring at the stars, wondering what lay beyond. Humanity's curiosity had always been its greatest strength. When faced with a problem, humans didn't just calculate, they imagined. They dreamed. And sometimes, dreaming was enough. Her lips moved unconsciously as she whispered the riddle to herself again. Boundless yet confined, shapeless yet structured. Her fingers tapped lightly on her desk. She thought of oceans, skies, and the universe itself. The answer was right there, just out of reach, like a melody she couldn't quite remember. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the room grew more charged. Jalak's voice rose in irritation as his latest hypothesis was dismissed by Cloroth with a wave of his hand. Other students were beginning to doubt themselves, their confidence eroding under the weight of the riddle's complexity. Finally, Sarah's mind clicked. She straightened, her heart pounding as the answer crystallized in her thoughts. It was so simple, so absurdly simple that she felt a rush of both relief and disbelief. Could it really be this? Cloroth's voice broke through her thoughts. Time is nearly up, he announced, his deep, resonant tone quelling the restless murmurs. Present your answers, or accept defeat. Around her, the other students scrambled to finalize their theories. Jalak's mandibles clicked furiously as he produced a dazzling holographic model of a multidimensional lattice. Sarah, however, stayed silent, her confidence building. Cloroth's gaze fell on her. And you, Sarah Blake? Will humanity submit in silence, or do you have an answer? Sarah stood, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. I have an answer. Every alienite in the room turned toward her. Jalak let out a scoffing hiss, and someone muttered something derisive in a guttural alien tongue. But Sarah didn't falter. She met Cloroth's gaze head-on. Speak, Cloroth said simply, his tone unreadable. Sarah took a deep breath and said, the answer is, a paradox. The room fell utterly silent, the silence in the room was deafening. Sarah's words hung in the air, suspended like a fragile thread that could snap under the weight of scrutiny. A paradox? Jalak's mandibles clicked sharply, his voice dripping with disdain. That's your answer? A nonsensical concept from an underdeveloped species? Sarah didn't flinch, though her pulse raced. She had been bracing for this reaction, especially from the haughty insectoid. She turned her attention to Cloroth, whose expression remained unreadable, his 4 eyes fixed on her with unnerving intensity. "Explain," Cloroth said finally, his deep, resonant voice slicing through the tension. His words weren't a request, they were a command. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward, her palms damp but steady. She glanced at the glowing riddle still floating in the air. "It is boundless yet confined, shapeless yet structured." "What am I?" "I've thought about how this riddle is framed," she began, her voice clear but measured. "The way it contradicts itself, boundless yet confined, shapeless yet structured. It's designed to force you to consider opposing truths coexisting." She paused, gauging the room. Some of the alien students were watching her intently, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Jalak let out a low, dismissive hum, but Sarah ignored him. "Humans have a saying," she continued. "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." We're used to seeing the world as complex and layered, where contradictions are part of the bigger picture. A paradox isn't a failure of logic, it's an acknowledgement that reality isn't always black and white. Cloroth tilted his head slightly, a faint flicker of interest crossing his features. "And how does this relate to the riddle, Sarah Blake?" Sarah's confidence grew. "The riddle is the answer," she said, gesturing to the glowing script. "It's a paradox in itself. The more you try to resolve it logically, the more it defies resolution. It's meant to test your ability to think beyond rigid structures, to embrace the idea that something can exist in contradiction and still be true." The room erupted into murmurs. Jalak slammed a clawed hand onto his desk, his eyes flashing with irritation. "This is absurd. The answer can't be the riddle itself. That's circular reasoning, not intellect." "It's not circular reasoning," Sarah shot back, her tone sharp but controlled. "It's understanding the purpose behind the riddle. You've been trying to break it down into equations and models, but it's not about finding a tangible answer. It's about shifting perspective. The answer isn't meant to satisfy, it's meant to provoke." Cloroth raised a hand, silencing the growing debate. He stepped forward, his robe trailing behind him like liquid shadow. The intensity of his gaze made Sarah's skin prickle, but she stood her ground. "You claim that the riddle is a test of perception," Cloroth said slowly. "And that its solution lies not in logic, but in the willingness to embrace contradiction." "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice unwavering. "A paradox reflects the complexity of existence. It challenges us to think in ways that go beyond the confines of pure reason." Cloroth studied her for a long moment, his eyes glimmering with an unreadable light. Then, with deliberate precision, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers. The glowing riddle dissolved into a cascade of shimmering particles. "The human is correct," he announced, his voice resonating through the room. The reaction was immediate. Gasps and exclamations of disbelief filled the air. Jalak recoiled as though he'd been struck, his mandibles clicking furiously. Other students exchanged stunned looks, their disbelief mirrored in the bioluminescent flashes of their skin. Sarah felt a wave of relief and triumph wash over her, though she kept her expression composed. Cloroth approached her, his towering figure casting a long shadow. "You have done what no other species has achieved," he said, his tone solemn. "You have not only solved the riddle but understood its purpose. Humanity has proven itself capable of seeing beyond the limits of conventional thought." He paused, his gaze piercing. "This is no small feat, Sarah Blake. But it raises a question, what else might humanity be capable of?" Before Sarah could respond, Cloroth turned to the class. "Dismissed," he said, his voice final. The students began to file out, some muttering angrily, others casting Sarah wary glances. As she gathered her things, Cloroth's voice stopped her. "Stay, Sarah Blake. There is more to discuss." The room emptied, leaving Sarah alone with Cloroth. Her triumph was tempered by curiosity and a growing sense of foreboding. She had solved the riddle, but something told her this was only the beginning. The universal classroom was empty now, save for Sarah and Cloroth. The air felt heavier in the absence of the other students, as though the room itself were aware of the gravity of the moment. Cloroth's 4 eyes bore into her, unreadable and unblinking. You must be wondering why I asked you to stay, Cloroth said, his voice even but layered with an undercurrent of curiosity. Sarah nodded cautiously. I figured you had questions about my answer. Your answer, Cloroth repeated, his tone almost amused. Yes, your answer has sparked questions, not just about you, but about your species. Do you realize the significance of what you've done? Sarah hesitated. I solved a riddle no one else could, she said, trying to sound confident, though a part of her doubted that was the full story. Cloroth stepped closer, his robed form towering over her. You did not simply solve a riddle, Sarah Blake. You challenged the way every species in this academy thinks. The riddle was a test, yes, but it was also a mirror, a reflection of how civilizations approached the unknown. Most see the paradox and try to force it into clarity, as if logic alone can master the universe. But you, he paused, steadying her. You embraced the ambiguity. That is something no species here has dared to do. Sarah felt a mix of pride and unease at his words. What does that mean for humanity? She asked cautiously. Cloroth's expression darkened slightly. It means that your species possesses potential that even I did not foresee. It means the galaxy will take notice, and not all of that attention will be kind. By the time Sarah left the classroom, her mind was spinning. Cloroth's words lingered, each one a weight pressing on her chest. She walked through the halls of the Galactic Academy, past alien students who cast her sidelong glances, some curious, others openly hostile. Jalak was waiting for her near the central atrium. His towering insectoid frame loomed as he clicked his mandibles in irritation. Congratulations, human, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. You've proven yourself a novelty. Enjoy your moment. It won't last. Sarah squared her shoulders and met his glare. It's not about moments, Jalak. It's about perspective. Maybe you should try expanding yours. Jalak hissed, his chitinous plates flaring briefly, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stalked off, his frustration evident in the sharp clacking of his legs against the polished floor. She watched him go, a knot of tension in her stomach. For all her triumph, she was beginning to realize that success here came with a price. The other students weren't just jealous, they were threatened. Humanity's unexpected victory had upset the Academy's rigid hierarchy, and Sarah was now at the center of a brewing storm. Later that evening, Sarah found herself sitting alone in the Academy's observation dome, staring out at the endless stars. The view was breathtaking, but tonight it felt daunting. The galaxy was vast, and Earth was just a tiny speck within it. How could she, a single human, possibly bear the weight of what Cloroth had hinted at? You look troubled, a voice said, breaking her thoughts. Sarah turned to see Aaron, a diminutive, fox-like alien with golden fur and intelligent, shimmering eyes. Aaron was one of the few students who had been kind to her since her arrival. It's been a day, Sarah admitted, offering a faint smile. Aaron tilted his head. Word spreads quickly here. You solved Cloroth's riddle. That's no small feat. It doesn't feel like a victory, Sarah said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. It feels like I've put a target on my back. Aaron nodded thoughtfully. Change always comes at a cost. But don't underestimate the power of what you've done. You've shown the galaxy that humans are more than they believed. That kind of revelation can reshape everything. Or make things worse, Sarah muttered, resting her chin on her hand. Cloroth thinks this will draw attention to humanity. Bad attention. Perhaps, Aaron said, his tone gentle but firm. But it's better to be seen than ignored. You forced the galaxy to take notice. Now it's up to you to decide what they see. As Sarah lay in her quarters that night, her mind churned with thoughts of paradoxes and potential. She had solved the riddle, yes, but at what cost? Cloroth's words echoed in her mind, the galaxy will take notice. She stared at the ceiling, the faint hum of the station lulling her into an uneasy calm. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain, this was just the beginning. The riddle may have been solved, but the real challenge was only now unfolding. Sarah stood in Cloroth's private chambers, a room unlike anything else in the Galactic Academy. The walls pulsed faintly with a soft, organic glow, as if alive, and the air was thick with an unplaceable energy. It was unnervingly quiet, save for the soft hum of ancient machines embedded into the floor. She felt small, her earlier triumph eclipsed by the gravity of this moment. Cloroth observed her from across the room, his 4 eyes shining with an intensity that made her uneasy. "Do you know why I brought you here?" he asked, his voice calm yet resonant with authority. "I assume it's about the riddle," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the weight of his gaze. Cloroth inclined his head slightly. "Indeed. But the riddle was never just a test of intellect. It was far more than that. Do you know its origin?" Sarah shook her head. "You said it was created by the Karkath, but I'm guessing there's more to it?" Cloroth's lips curled into a faint smile. "Perceptive. The riddle predates even the Karkath. It is an artifact of an ancient civilization that vanished long before any of us walked among the stars. They were known as the Celestians, a species unmatched in their wisdom and ingenuity." Sarah's breath caught. The Celestians were a myth, whispered about in fragments of galactic lore. If they had truly existed, their knowledge could rival the gods themselves. "They left behind many enigmas," Cloroth continued, "but this riddle was their most significant. It was not a mere intellectual exercise, it was a safeguard." "A safeguard?" Sarah repeated, frowning. "Against what?" Cloroth moved closer, his robes flowing like liquid shadow. "The Celestians believed that any species capable of solving this riddle would possess a way of thinking unique enough to face the challenges of the cosmos. Challenges that even they could not withstand." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What kind of challenges?" Cloroth's expression darkened. "There are forces in this universe that defy understanding, forces that consume civilizations, not with weapons, but with entropy itself. The Celestians called it the voidling phenomenon. Entire worlds vanish into its grasp, their essence unmade. The riddle was their way of finding a species capable of seeing beyond logic, capable of understanding the paradoxical nature of such a threat." Sarah's mind reeled. "And you think humanity is that species?" "I do now," Cloroth said. "Your answer demonstrated something rare, a balance of logic and imagination, of reason and intuition. Traits your species seems to possess in abundance." She took a shaky breath. "So, you're saying solving the riddle wasn't just an academic exercise, it was a way of proving humanity's worth?" Cloroth nodded. "Precisely. And now, the galaxy will look to humanity for guidance, for solutions. Whether they like it or not." The weight of Cloroth's words followed Sarah back to her quarters. She couldn't sleep, her thoughts were a storm of fear and questions. How could she, a teenager, represent the potential of an entire species? How could Earth, a planet barely stepping into the galactic stage, stand against something that had undone the Celestians? The next day, the Academy was abuzz with whispers. Sarah's success had spread like wildfire, and the reactions were as polarized as she'd expected. Some students, like Aaron, expressed admiration and curiosity. Others, like Jalak, radiated thinly veiled hostility. "You've stirred the hive," Aaron said, falling into step beside her in the corridor. "Word is, some of the council elders are already debating what this means for humanity's role in the galaxy." Sarah sighed. "I didn't ask for this. I just answered a riddle." "Perhaps," Aaron said, his voice thoughtful. "But sometimes, the simplest actions ripple the farthest. The question is, are you ready for what comes next?" Later, Sarah found herself standing before a vast viewport, staring out at the galaxy beyond. Cloroth's words echoed in her mind, the riddle was a safeguard. She clenched her fists, determination rising in her chest. Earth might not have been ready for this attention, but that didn't mean they couldn't rise to the occasion. Humanity had always thrived on challenges, pushing boundaries, breaking barriers, and finding solutions where none seemed possible. If the galaxy thought Earth was unworthy, Sarah would prove them wrong. And if the voidling phenomenon was as dangerous as Cloroth claimed, then she would do everything in her power to ensure humanity was prepared. As she stared into the stars, a faint smile crossed her lips. The riddle might have been solved, but the true challenge was just beginning.